Hi guys, it's me, Sapphire Opal again. Today I want to talk about Starseed Walk-ins and how they relate to ancient civilizations, or rather the way ancient civilizations' power changed hands or even downright disappeared, and how it relates to today's world. So before I go on to actually talk about what Starseed Walk-ins are and the indications and such, I do want to touch on first on how incarnations actually work. So the common view of incarnations basically seems to be that the soul, aka higher self or astral body, sits inside of our body or walks beside us in the astral planes where we walk physically. But more specifically, basically sitting inside the body asleep while we're doing our thing, or it's just sitting us watching through our eyes. This is actually not how incarnations work. I've asked several deities and other star beings, so to speak, as to how incarnations actually work, and the way they actually work is either A, if you have a higher self, you have an essence of a higher self in that, or even multiple. Like say you could be a mix of two deities rolled into one, and that is your soul. Okay? And then that would be a soul original, where you are made of entirely of a higher self or higher selves' essences. And that's what is a so-called soul original, is where you're all higher self essence. A so-called soul copy is where you have a higher self essence or multiple essences, but then it's mixed with ether, which is so-called filler substance. Now, sometimes they'll say that a person is a close copy of themselves, where there's only a small bit of filler substance, and then some trait or some characteristic of themselves is excluded from the soul, and then it is filled in with some kind of filler. And basically the essence will have different traits, like certain personality traits, certain things that they like, certain landmark events that tend to happen for this particular essence, and other things like that. And this actually explains why some people will have similar life paths or similar landmark events, maybe some similar childhood styles and similar parent upbringings, and then even like similar things, like you both have to have like a plate in your hip, or someone has a plate in their hip, and then someone has a plate in their back, all from a car accident that happened, like, in the early 20s or something like that. And then you also have like similar interests, similar likes and dislikes, personality traits, and certain little quirks and things like that. So I thought that was interesting to share about how incarnations actually work, and I believe this tidbit of information is extremely important in understanding how incarnations work. And also, in this particular case, walk-ins, which I will talk about more about the signs and indications and what walk-ins really are. Okay, so I do believe that, as I'm making this video, that the explanation of what a soul original versus soul copy versus having a so-called lower self or no higher self, you just exist, no real soul, you're just existing type of deal. So I'm going to start with a soul original, which is the mix, which is essentially where your soul consists of only the essences of one or two, or your higher self, rather, your soul is the mix of one or two essences of astral beings, higher selves. So a soul original, as I think the higher institution, I can't really think of the name of them right now, as put it, there are some people that are white blood cells, and white blood cells, interestingly enough, compared to red blood cells, have a nucleus, which is kind of like almost like where the DNA is held and stuff like that in cells. It almost makes me think of like the brain of a cell, like they kind of instruct. They contain the instructions for what a cell is supposed to do, and contains a lot of information about a whole lot of different stuff. So a soul original, I want to compare it to a white blood cell. And it said that the white blood cells of society, they don't really try to fit in as much. They have more of a specific job to do. They have more of a purpose, a specific purpose in life. Their purpose isn't just to be part of the flow, so to speak, like maybe like red blood cells are. And like soul originals may not always necessarily be your go-to, like like to fit in or whatever, or to how to make someone like you more or something like that. Or you may seek them for advice for like conflicts, or you have a problem or you're trying to figure out or something. And with soul originals, it's kind of more like they may be more spiritual, they may be more in tune with themselves, and I don't know if you notice this or not, but some people, they just have more of a personality, more of a mind of their own, form their own opinions, they have their own point of views, and they have their own unique reasoning, and you can definitely tell that they are who they are, right? Like they can stand out from a crowd a little bit easier, I feel like. And that's because they are a soul original. Like they are all higher self. They have no filler substance. Like they just have a more full personality, full mindset, fullness to them, if that makes sense. So basically with the soul originals, it's kind of more like they're just more who they are, and they are more, even though we are all 100% who we are, it's just like with the soul originals, they're kind of like more like, they're just more in tune with themselves a lot of times, if that makes sense. Or they're more in tune with what they're not aware of, if that makes sense. Like more self-awareness in that sense of their limitations and what they can and can't do and what their skills are and things like that. Not necessarily, having 100% direction in life, but they kind of know more about themselves, higher introspection, if that makes sense. Now, next up, I want to talk about soul copies. Okay, now on to the soul copies. So basically, a soul copy is like a mix of ether, the so-called filler substance, and a little bit of an essence of an astral being, or higher self, soul, whatever you want to call it, making your soul. So soul originals are kind of like white blood cells. They do contain a nuclei, they have a specific job to do, and they're kind of more like your go-to when there's a problem, like like when an invading bacteria or virus or whatever enters the body, and out comes the white blood cells. But they might not necessarily be your go-to for just making things happen. They're probably your more go-to when a change is necessary in civilization. But that's typically what a soul original is. Now with a soul copies, they have their place too. It's not a bad thing, but it's just, like I said, everyone's got their own purpose. And with the soul copies, sometimes if you're like a close copy where you only have just a small bit of ether or whatever, you can be very much more like a solo original. How to tell the difference? You probably will feel like, okay, I'm not quite this, but I'm pretty close. Maybe I have a little bit of a so-called inner demon here and there, but not a whole lot, and I usually fight against it. Now, when it comes to the soul copies, they're kind of more like the red blood cells. They don't contain nuclei because that's how they get more of a flatter surface, so that the red blood cells can flow through the veins easier and arteries and things like that, and easier to carry oxygen this way. So with the soul copies, it's kind of more like, they go with the flow, like red blood cells do in the body. And their job is more so to make it so that everyday society is going on. Like, like a lot of these people, they may think, a job is a job, and, they're just kind of like, going through the motions, maybe not putting a whole lot of thought into everyday living, like, don't take this too seriously, it's just, we live this life once, let's try to enjoy it, maybe not putting too much thought into anything, and just, again, going with the flow. Now, the bad part about being a soul copy, especially if you have more ether than higher self essence, is that a lot of these people can also be very selfish. Like, they're not necessarily thinking about how what they're doing is impacting others. Like, they may be more prone to firing people. It's like, oh, I'm just doing my job. But then it's like, try to come up with, like, a soul original may be more prone to saying, all right, well, I'm firing this person, but maybe I can give them, like, a couple weeks of pay so that they have something to go off of and offer, like, I could be a reference, things like that, if they actually mean it and like the person, kind of deal. With soul copies, they can kind of be a little bit more selfish at times, quite frankly, and it doesn't really matter, and it's not as discriminating as to who, as far as this type of thing goes, where it's kind of like, don't take it personal, blah, 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 or don't, it's not like, it's just business, or it's just like, they don't put too much thought into much of anything, just because they just can't, or they just won't, for whatever reason. And then, it tends to be a little bit more like, like self-preservation is stronger in soul copies, and, and people that don't even have a higher self-essence, and things like that. So next, I do want to talk about the incarnation type where it's just ether or just filler substance. So yeah, that up next, ether incarnations. Okay, now, last but not least, for the incarnation types, ether or filler substance, or so-called lower self incarnations. Now, these are the so-called dark workers, as people like to call it, okay? Our dark side, our inner demons, so to speak, is what people are going to reference the ether or the filler substance, the lower selves, okay? So you could basically call these like the invaders in a way. Like, these are the type of people, like, you want to think of a lot of people will think of like psychopaths when it comes to ether incarnations, okay? Like, they'll think of like, the horrible people that rob banks and all this and that. That's not necessarily true. Some people, they do what they do for a certain reason, and it's not always a good one, but I don't condone any of those things, by the way, just before someone comes up with this moronic assumption based on what I just said. But when it comes to ether incarnations or straight up lower self incarnations, just filler substance, like the absolute type that never puts any thought into stuff, doesn't really have a care in the world, and are pretty much just downright very selfish people, Strong self-preservation, very, very primitive almost, like, in how they approach the world, like, very primitive, like, almost animalistic in a way, like, with how they approach sex, with how they approach relationships. It's about procreation. It's about self-preservation of the DNA, preserving the family name, and that's all they really care about. Self-preservation and staying alive as long as possible kind of deal. So a lot of it, like, in, what you really think of when it comes to, like, the stereotypical really greedy people, like the type that will really screw you over, and they don't care as long as it means preserving themselves, and that's all that matters. And that's really the best way I can explain lower selves very briefly. And, but as one of my good old friends said, you don't have to be a rapist or a murderer or even a thief to be a piece of shit. Like, you could be, like, it's part of my French, but you could be a bad person not doing any of those things. Like I said before, you could be the type of person that, they just do their thing, like I mentioned earlier. Like Sue Coffees, they do, have a little bit more of a thought process about things, and they do have more of a conscience, so to speak. But people that are just ether incarnations are very selfish beings. They're very, it's almost like they see others as a means to an end, like using people and loving things in a way is how I want to put it. Very mindless, like very easy to brainwash, because, I will talk about this is a whole different subject, but, talking about demons and, technology, and how demons are cyborgs, and it all ties into this ether filler stuff, because that's what they are. They're incarnated demons, quite frankly. It's not necessarily a horrible thing, because what's funny, just not really funny, but what's interesting is that demons themselves are a lot more spiritual than these ether incarnations are. Even though that's what these incarnations are. They're essentially demons incarnated on Earth, but demons themselves are a lot more spiritual than these ether incarnations. And they know that these people are pieces of crap, and, these people are just not good souls. They're so-called, they're bad souls. And they know it. And then, humans they're just programmed to be a certain way, just like their incarnations are programmed to just go with the flow, and just, do their own thing, do whatever it takes to survive. Self-preservation. The whole 9 yards, and it doesn't matter what it takes, even if it means murder, if it means robbing, if it means this, doing that, and screwing this person over, screwing that person over. Doesn't really matter, as long as they preserve themselves and survive as long as possible, no matter how greedy they are. That's all that matters to them. It's survivalism. So that is the topic of types of soul incarnations. As I was making this video, again, I realized that the different types of incarnations all deserve an explanation before we go forward in this video. Okay, so on to the indications and types of Starseed Walk-ins. So, basically a walk-in is essentially when there's some kind of swap or blending with the essence that is in our conscience, whether it is a higher self-conscious as a soul original, a soul copy, or just a mix of different types of ether. So, with this being said, a full exchange is basically a swap out entirely. Okay, so whatever conscience is there now is going to get swapped out. And this is the most common type of walk-in. And sometimes, and these people are the ones that tend to have the most memory lapses and are more likely to have the most sudden changes in interest and taste and things like that. But that's on for the next type. That's on for the next part of this video. And then there is the soul blending, or what I've read is called soul braiding. But I feel this is a kind of a poor explanation of what this type of walk-in is like, because it kind of assumes like it's entwining almost two like higher selves, as if, you know, there's two people that were like being meshed together inside of a person, but that's not really how incarnations work. So I feel like it's kind of better to think of it as like almost like as I showed before in the last slide, like DNA mixing. Like, you know, sometimes you'll be like 100% one essence, and that's it. Like, you know, say for example, you're 100% a Poseidon incarnation, or you're just 100% of a Fae, or whatever race you are, what your that essence's unique identity in the astral planes is. Soul blending is basically when either another soul essence or higher self gets mixed in and you become like 99-1% or 50-50 or 25-75 or whatever the ratio ends up being in your particular case. This is not as commonplace, but it does sometimes happen. Like, this is basically what you could call like gaining a higher self, where you sometimes gain new interest and you gain new this, and maybe you're not quite as interested in something, but you still are. You know, kind of depends on how the mix happens. Again, this all occurs like in the astral planes or in the Fae realm. And this is the part where I tell you of how astral projection works a little bit. Astral projection does not work as in you are literally going through the astral planes necessarily, unless you are one of the few that have the authorization to physically enter the astral planes. But you really don't want to do that too much if you do, because you can end up developing all kinds of breathing problems and respiratory diseases like asthma or small lung disease, COPD, and other stuff like that, because the air in the astral planes is toxic. But that's a whole different topic. And I made a video about the astral planes and how they're physical, and my experiences of actually being there physically. But again, different topic. Now on to the next one. So a stasis walk-in. Now this is very rare, and it's said to be for ancient healers, but reality is I'm not really sure how many of these have actually occurred. And this is actually something that happened to me, a stasis walk-in, where a soul temporarily walks into a vessel and is likely there to help heal this vessel and then walk out when their mission is done. So a lot of these swaps, or really all of them, happen when we are not conscious, as in we are asleep, or it happens during some kind of traumatic event like car wreck or something of the like, where we are unconscious one way or another. Ideally when we're asleep, but that's not how it always happens. So when I was, I want to say about 5 years old, I remember a very strange so-called dream one night, where before I went to bed I saw like these green and purple dots, sparkles everywhere. I could not explain it, but it was very weird. And in this particular so-called night, I had a dream like of seeing things through like a golden bubble, like random memories, and the third eye view of seeing myself like playing outside with my siblings and our new neighbors, because we recently moved into this neighborhood from another state, and then seeing some kind of place where there's a lot of like glowing plants and fairies and stuff like that, and then seeing random memories of like a random tribal land, like tribal reservation, and some other weird stuff going on. I didn't really understand what it was at the time, and then I woke up and I again saw the green and purple sparkles waking up, and here's the real kicker. So I woke up, walked towards the closet, opened the closet door, and I said, as a 6-year-old child, "Yep, I sure am growing up fast." And I looked in the closet and I saw clothes I did not recognize. One of them I remember being a gray sweater with some maroon on it. And I can't remember what it said on the sweater now, but I do have an old photo buried somewhere in my mom and dad's house of it. I asked my guides through my pendulum and ABC board, which I highly recommend getting a non-corrupt pendulum and a printable ABC board, by the way, to actually start talking to guides directly and getting real messages instead of just assuming through our hearing or through a dream that can be misinterpreted what really they said and try to remember. So I asked him what happened, and apparently a soul copy of mine, which is essentially my higher self with a very small amount of ether mixed, entered my body, and then I went into the Fey realm, and my soul went to rest and heal. And then I was gone from Earth for about a year, and then I walked back in about a year later. And that is why when I went to bed and saw those sparkles, and then I woke up and I again saw those sparkles and had that really strange dream and woke up and went to the closet and realized I don't recognize any of these clothes. And the room looked a little bit different from what I remember before going to sleep. This is pretty weird stuff. So these are the types of Starseed Walk-ins, and I'm going to talk in the next part of this video, the indications you either may be a walk-in already, or also signs that you may also be having another soul walk in. Alright, now on to this part of the video where I discuss the actual indications that you may be indeed a walk-in. Now again, keep in mind when you are reading this list that if you are a full-on exchange, then a lot of these are going to be more suddenly onset. But if you're a so-called soul blending walk-in, or in other words, a soul braid, which I still think is a horrible way to explain it, then these are just kind of more like, you gain some, you lose some a little bit, or you become a little bit more interested in this when you were more interested in something else before. And then sometimes if you're like a stasis walk-in, which, these are extremely rare, which happened to me as a kid, and, I don't really have any memory of when I wasn't here, obviously. Basically, most of these sudden changes, it's going to be more so when it's like a full-on exchange, and if it's more gradual, then you may be a so-called soul blending walk-in is what's going on. And sometimes these changes could even indicate that you, in fact, may be close to experiencing a swap out yourself, or you're already experiencing a soul blending as we speak. So some of the indications revolve around our physical being, what we notice inside of ourselves physically, such as like body coordination issues, like you don't really fit into this body that you're in right now, like you could trip a lot, you could be clumsy, you could be dropping things a lot, or even your sense of balance gets out of whack, and you maybe have some problems with tinnitus and things like that, and your auditory system gets out of whack, which can happen and cause your blood pressure to drop and things like that. And then you may also notice some other physical aches and pains, like, maybe shoulder and neck pain. And I'm also determined to think that you can also have spinal problems, like where the whole chakra system is said to be in alignment with all your body organs and such. So I think that spinal pain could be part of it too, like where your back hurts and it feels like it's all closer to your spine and such. And a lot of these will start with a lot of times we'll start with like some kind of traumatic event, such as a physical injury, either psychological or physical trauma, like, again, that relates to injury, a blood or organ transplant, or ideally when simply asleep. But basically, in essence, all these will occur when you are unconscious. And then you may also experience things like memory lapses or memory loss when you were able to previously remember something and now you can't anymore. But when full-on exchanges happen, typically there's going to be some kind of predetermined agreement that these souls have had in the astral planes, where one soul is going to swap out for another, or this one's going to start blending in, or someone's going to walk in for a period of time and then leave, and then maybe go back and forth as needed, whatever the arrangement is, and for whatever reason. And then you can also suddenly have memories of a place you may not have been to physically, which is most likely your lifetime before this one, or you suddenly are getting more interested in someone that you maybe not have been interested in before. And, maybe this was why you met them before. Like, you may not have liked them before, but now you do, or, so, and this ties in with relationships changing either for the better or worse. And especially with full-on exchanges, they can result in a divorce within a couple of years. The whole, I don't recognize you anymore, it's like you're a whole different person type of mindset that comes into play with a lot of these full-on exchanges, because literally you may be talking to a completely different soul, a completely different person, just inside of that vessel, because they are a walk-in. And now, this can also apply to pets. They do say that, animals can tell if someone's a good soul or a bad soul, or they could sense some kind of change happening in their owners. Well, pets may either start to become suddenly more distant or clingier to a person that is a walk-in, or possibly you're about to have someone else walk in and you're about to bounce from here. And then you may suddenly become more spiritually determined to know what your mission is and your desire to fulfill it, even if this is not yet known. Now, this is because a walk-in occurs for a reason. The soul that was initially in a body, a vessel, so to speak, they're done with this lifetime for some reason, like maybe some kind of mistake in the divine blueprints happened, a so-called tamper, or something bad happened to the divine plans, and this soul just has to go somewhere else, or they fulfill their mission. They're only supposed to be here for a short bit, but it's not time for this vessel to die, and this soul needs to accomplish something and finish this lifetime for this person, basically. And, they just need a vessel, and it's not ideal for them to start from scratch, so they have to take another vessel, and therefore that's how these arrangements happen in the astral planes and in the Fey realm, essentially, where they can do all kinds of interesting things. Now, with this being said, I do want to talk more into how the concept of walk-ins, soul originals, and soul copies and such ties into ancient civilizations, and how a lot of them either met their demise or the powers that be made it so that new empires would rise and stuff like that. But mainly related to the downfall, and I'm going to explain why in this next part of the video. Okay, now on to how the Starseed Walk-ins concept ties in with ancient civilizations and what this could mean for present time civilization as we know it today. Alright, so I want to mention that there are some ancient civilizations that are said to have disappeared without a trace, or no known cause of what made the civilization lead to its demise. Now, understand that I'm not here to be a historian, and I'm not here to be 100% historically correct. This is just supposed to be a brief overview and a very much a big picture video presentation as to the whole connection between Starseed Walk-ins and how it is related to the whole demise of civilizations, or as some people would like to think, that these ancient civilizations simply assimilated with other cultures. Now, this list here is only some of the ancient civilizations that have come and gone. We have Clovis, which was found in New Mexico. Some sources say it's one to be the oldest civilizations in North America. There's no written records of these guys, and only war arrows were found, so we don't know a whole lot about them, so we can consider that to be a mysterious disappearance of this civilization, or assimilation, whichever you want to prefer to call it. We got the Mayans, the Rapa Nui, which is in the Easter Islands, Sanying Dui, which is in ancient China, Indus Harappan, which is in India, Pakistan, Thonis, which is in Egypt, the Greenland Vikings, and we got some other ones here like Roanoke. The Supernatural fans, you're going to love this reference. This is actually found in North Carolina, which is located in the United States, and this place is known for having Croatoan written on the fence post. Now, I'm going to talk more about the theorized causes of what led to all the downfall of these ancient civilizations, but in the show Supernatural, the Croatoan virus is, aka disease, is what is said to have been the downfall of Roanoke, which is a place in North Carolina again. Now, one I really want to touch up on, which is why I put it on the top of the list, Cahokia, which is near St. Louis in the state of Missouri in the United States, and is close to the Mississippi River. And this is what really got me interested in the whole Starseed Walk-in concept to begin with. I remember I was having a conversation with my sister. I have mentioned in other videos before, and in this one as well, and this is where I get all my information from. And of course doing research and such. The spiritual side of the information I get in my more recent videos, and generally speaking, is through divination and talking to different deities, different alien species, and things like that. Now, I was talking to my sister about different things that we were learning in divination and all this other stuff, and a very weird typo came up on my phone, and I had absolutely have never heard of it before, but literally Cahokia, as it's spelled on here, and is literally how it is spelled, showed up as the word that was typed in. I use swipe on my phone, as many of you probably do in your smartphones when texting your friends and family and such, or even doing a Google search and you use swipe. So Cahokia came up, and I looked into it, and it was said that it was one of the first known Native American tribal civilizations and pyramids and such found in North America, Cahokia. And some of them still exist to this day. And I talked to a deity named Mohan. He is known under as he is like the top water god in many Native American traditions, even going on into the ancient Hawaiian pantheon. But in one of the Native American traditions, he goes by the name Mohan, Mohan, and he is the one Native American deity that I talk to the most. He is a creation master, which is a different topic, and he is a big-time water deity. And he is the head healing deity, actually. So, anyways, on with Cahokia. I picked up my pendulum because I wanted to know why on earth Cahokia showed up in my typo. And Mohan started to talk about how Cahokia is an ancient civilization that disappeared, and it was indeed related to a flood. And he was talking about how they suddenly disappeared, and and it kind of relates to the Hopi tribe where there's a cleansing of one Earth, and it's going on to the new Earth, so to speak, where basically a whole new group of souls are basically on Earth. So-called survivors is how the Hopi tradition calls it. But apparently, this was Mohan's hint related to what happened to me as a child, because he's actually one of the deities that is the biggest advocate for me becoming for someone else walking into my vessel and my soul getting some healing done. And so I just thought that was a very interesting topic, and it was also coincidentally him that was telling me about what happened to me when I was 5 years old that I mentioned earlier, with the sparkles, the weird dream I had, and waking up, opening my closet door, and seeing clothes I didn't recognize. All the same deity. And it was only recently is when I started to look more into the Starseed Walk-in concept, and I really wanted to know what happened. And the fact is, and this is what I've learned, is that all of these ancient civilizations suddenly had a change in assimilation or just downright disappeared from their cities and such. And it all relates to walk-ins happening on a large scale, where the all soul originals that were responsible for making these civilizations possible, coming up with the language, coming up with the basis for the culture and the infrastructure of these ancient cities, and even modern civilization as we know it today. All soul originals, or very close copies, are who came up with the blueprints for life as we know it every day today. So, walk-ins and the downfall of ancient civilizations. How are they connected? The answer is this. So, pretty much the exchange of souls, full-on exchanges. Sometimes the soul blending may be more gradual in some people, but then, eventually the original soul will leave, as what happened in these ancient civilizations. And this occurred on a large scale, which is what led to dramatic changes in all of these ancient civilizations, whether it's them packing up their bags and leaving, and then maybe the replaced souls basically came in to essentially die for this person. Like, they're all Aether, which is, a whole different topic. It's only native to Earth, this Aether stuff. It's so-called filler substance and souls, so to speak, it's not a higher self. It's just, it's so-called lower selves, but we'll talk more about that in a different video. So there you have it. It's full-on soul exchanges, soul walk-ins coming in, taking over these bodies, these vessels, and things just either they just go downfall or they completely change into something different. Okay, now I touched on to how the concept of walk-ins have impacted past civilizations, the ones that are no longer around. Some of which are said to have, some say that they just simply all assimilated into newer civilizations, some of which still exist today, or straight up disappeared without a trace. And like I said before, the commonly theorized causes of demise that are logically explainable include like natural disasters, disease, destruction of the civilization infrastructure, things like that. And it all relates to the fact that soul copies and straight up ether incarnations walked in for the soul originals that were all destined to leave Earth. The so-called Great Ascension of each ancient civilization, all those souls were replaced with soul copies and ether incarnations. Now, I'm sure some of you are starting to wonder, okay, so how come some of these ancient civilizations became better and better as they came along? Well, you have to think, what I said earlier about soul originals is that the soul originals basically are the ones that are more like creating the infrastructure for everything. Like, they're the ones that are laying down the bones and, laying down the bricks and basically making it the start of everything. Like, setting the pace and setting up the blueprints, basically, almost, is how I'm going to compare it. Like, the architects and, stuff like that. And then the copies and, the ones that are, ether incarnations, so to speak. Those, they're just kind of like piling on and modifying what was presented before them, but they didn't necessarily create it. Like, they just are making modifications as they go along, so to speak. But there's someone that came up with all these original ideas, like coming up with the original idea for scissors, utensils, the basic building tools, like, a hammer and the pulleys and things like that. Originals came up with that, not the copies or the ether incarnations. So, how does this tie into modern civilization? Well, I can't really get into exact specifics because I'm very much a big picture oriented person, and I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty and take away from the overall message of this video. But there was once upon a time where civilizations were formed, and they were not about screwing each other over. It was much more like, hunters and gatherers. Like, we worked together more to feed each other, to look out for each other, kind of deal. And as modern society has progressed to what it is now, like, as we've gotten more into like the farming and stuff, it's actually where people have gotten more greedy. Because, I can make more of this, and, what do you have to provide for me, and, what can you do for me? You can't do anything? Okay, well, that's too bad for you. And that's why some people say that, the creation of money to begin with is a big downfall, actually. It made trading and stuff less of a problem, but it also made it so that people, they see everything has a dollar value, and, you kind of lose sight of the connectedness with people because all you care about is the money, not, necessarily who you're trading with or exchanging transactions with. And people are starting to love things more than they are people. We're using people loving things, not loving people and using things, which is how it's supposed to be. And, of course, you can kind of look at the way things are going in this world now, and despite all the technology we have, despite all of the so-called innovations that we have today and, being better able to treat diseases and stuff, the fact of the matter is, like, we still have high rates of illiteracy to this day. World hunger is still a problem to this day. I mean, heck, the big old pile of trash in the middle of the Pacific Ocean's getting bigger as we speak. Why are these problems that were made in modern civilization getting worse and not getting better? We have all the technology to make all this stuff go away. Why is it getting worse and not better? Because the simple the matter of fact is, people don't care. All people care about is what's right in front of their nose, and that is it. And I think this greatly relates to this whole walk-in concept. Pretty much, sometimes it's pretty much almost always going to be a soul copy coming in to fill in for a soul original. And therefore that might explain, like, you know, sudden changes in behavior, sudden changes in personality, what you like, what you don't like, the people you want to hang out with, the people you don't want to hang out with, who you get along with, who you don't get along with anymore, and even how the way, like, our pets are behaving towards us will change. And a lot of these great ancient civilizations, the big great ascension all of them had, and all these so-called great ascensions that are going on Earth to this day, it's the soul originals that came to Earth, did their thing, and are leaving. And you know what's filling in? Soul copies and straight up Aether incarnations. All the soul originals have been slowly but surely leaving Earth ever since the dawn of mankind. There's a lot of soul originals that began everything, and they've been incarnating, and really now we have so many people on this planet, and what's funny is that we're actually starting to lose soul originals. Pretty much what we're seeing for so-called new technologies is just piling on to what's already there. And you know what? I guess a lot of the purpose for a lot of so-called soul originals is starting to deplete. Their job here is done, and it's time for them to bounce. And the so-called Great Ascension that's supposed to be happening according to New Age website and New Age blogs and videos and everything else, you know, people think it's just, you know, they're here to increase the vibratory rate of the planet. The reality is when you are a walk-in, you are often walking into a hot mess. Sometimes not, but a lot of times, yeah. You walk in after a car wreck, you walk in after organ transplant, you walk in after a traumatic injury or traumatic event of some sort. It's not necessarily a good thing to be a walk-in. Now, sometimes, you know, it could be like a so-called redemption lifetime where it's like, all right, I screwed up in the last lifetime or whatever happened where you were before. And it is time for me to try to redeem my soul, but it's not necessarily a good thing for me to start from scratch. So, and I see that, you know, this person could be, you know, could be it, and then, you know, in the astral planes, the higher selves kind of have a conversation, you know, with higher powers that, you know, can authorize this type of, you know, deal, and either a pretty close copy, a lot of times it's going to be a pretty close copy of that person, but they're just not quite the same, will come in and fill the slot. But sometimes, you know, there's a little bit of something else that's mixed in there for some reason, and, you know, you just don't recognize that person anymore. And the reason why is because we got a walk-in, and whoever was there before is now gone. And as far as how this pertains to modern times, and when people are talking about the end times and stuff, it's not a very popular topic, and I know a lot of people are going to say stuff like, oh, well, you know, how many times the end of the world has been predicted, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing. It is going to happen. We don't know exactly when. people have tried to guess for thousands of years when the end of the world is going to be. But the reality is, none of them know. They were told lies. They were told tampers. They were told fake blueprints, fake divine blueprint details by, you guessed it, possibly demons. And by the way, most psychics on Earth are actually demonic seers. You don't tamper with them, okay? Don't mess with them, okay? I mean, hate to say it, but the truth about what Earth really is a bit of a scary truth. I'm not going to talk about it in this video, but as some people know, I made another video about how the so-called mission here to help Earth is a lie, and that is true. You don't have to like it. You don't want to. If you don't want to hear it, fine. But it's not really a good reason why we're here still. I mean, I'm not going to say everything that I know here, but I can certainly tell you that all of the Soul Originals are leaving Earth, and they're going to be leaving, and the rest of them are going to be leaving in not too long from now, actually. As a matter of fact, by the end of 2033 is when all the Soul Originals are scheduled to have gone on for the Great Ascension event, aka they're all bouncing. And they're being replaced with straight up Aether incarnations or close copies. And it's going to be happening in groups so that basically nobody is as likely going to notice. And now I'm pretty sure you may have picked up on what I am implying right now with the whole downfall of ancient civilizations and how this relates to modern civilization. And what's already been happening slowly but surely. People are talking about end days, and then if you look into the Hopi prophecy, it's either the death or survival of civilization. Talking about the fourth Earth and all this other stuff. Mohan, by the way, does say that, they misheard him. It's actually, we're on the third one right now. And many of the signs are pointing towards death of civilization. And I hate to say it, but I don't think there's not going to be really a new Earth after this downfall. When this whole downfall is finished, I can't tell you when. You don't have to like what I'm saying right now. It's scary, I know. But, if you're a good soul, you ain't going to be here for it. If you're walking, it's not necessarily a bad thing for you. It could just be, the soul of you're helping a soul original with a higher status. Yes, statuses are a thing spiritually. Okay, you don't get to just transmutate into whatever the hell you want after this lifetime. Like, that's not how it works. Okay, like there is a hierarchy spiritually. Sorry, but there is. Some people are higher on the totem pole and some are lower on the totem pole. And when it comes to divine blueprinters, it depends on the status of their higher self or higher selves. The ones that are higher up have more privileges as to what they can do spiritually. And you may think that, what does the spiritual have to do with the physical? And, again, can't see what's further than what's right in front of your nose. But I will say this, the spiritual trumps the physical. What happens after this lifetime, after this lifetime on Earth, it's, it's your, I could talk about like immortality on other planets and stuff, but, it's a whole different subject and how that's possible and how we can't achieve that here on Earth. Why? I'm not going to touch into it because that's not the topic of this video, but anyways, so I appreciate you watching this video. I hope you learned something new about Starseed Walk-ins because I feel like the explanations out there are really lame. Hate to say it. I mean, it's a good start. A little bit of a building blocks, but really not a good explanation, mainly because They don't really talk about how incarnations really work. There's no connection to how it relates to changes in the big scheme of things. There's no discussion about soul originals, copies, or even straight up, demonic incarnations, so to speak. None of the walk-ins, none of the stuff really talks about those things, and it's disappointing, not gonna lie. It just seems a little bit too fluffy and puppies and rainbows and sunshine and whatever. It's just not all it's about, but other places it is, but when it comes to Earth, that's not how it works. I hope you learned something. I hope you thought that this was educational, or at the very least interesting, or at the very least you thought my stories were of great interest. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you either subscribe, or if you don't, I'm sorry to hear that. But either way, have a good one. All right, bye.